the seat of the legislative branch of the federal government. The nearby planned capital of Putrajaya is the administrative capital, which represents the seat of both the executive branch, cabinet, federal ministries and agencies, and the judicial branch of the federal government. With a population of over 32 million, Malaysia is the world's 45th most populous country. The southernmost point of continental Eurasia is in Tanjung Piai, in the tropics. Malaysia is one of 17 megadiverse countries, home to numerous endemic species. Malaysia has its origins in the Malay kingdoms which, from the 18th century, became subject to the British Empire, along with the British Straits Settlements Protectorate. Peninsular Malaysia was unified as the Malayan Union in 1946. Malaya was restructured as the Federation of Malaya in 1948 and achieved independence on the 31st of August 1957. The independent Malaya united with the then British Crown colonies of North Borneo, Sarawak, and Singapore on the 16th of September 1963 to become Malaysia. In August 1965, Singapore was expelled from the Federation and became a separate independent country. The country is multi-ethnic and multicultural, which has a significant effect on its politics. About half the population is ethnically Malay, with minorities of Chinese, Indians, and indigenous peoples. The country's official language is Malaysian, a standard form of the Malay language. English remains an active second language. While recognizing Islam as the country's established religion, the constitution grants freedom of religion to non-Muslims. The government is modeled on the Westminster parliamentary system and the legal system is based on common law. The head of state is an elected monarch, chosen from among the 9 state sultans every 5 years. The head of government is the Prime Minister. After independence, the Malaysian GDP grew at an average of 6.5% per annum for almost 50 years. The economy has traditionally been fueled by its natural resources but is expanding in the sectors of science, tourism, commerce and medical tourism. Malaysia has a newly industrialized market economy, ranked 3rd largest in Southeast Asia and 33rd largest in the world. It is a founding member of ASEAN, OIC and a member of APEC, the Commonwealth and the Non-Aligned Movement. Etymology The name Malaysia is a combination of the word Malays and the Latin Greek suffix -alpha which can be translated as land of the Malays. The origin of the word Malayu is subject to various theories. It may derive from the Sanskrit Himalaya, referring to areas high in the mountains, or Malayapura, meaning mountain town. Another similar theory claims its origin lies in the Tamil words Malay and meaning mountain and city, land, respectively. Another suggestion is that it derives from the Pemalayu campaign. A final suggestion is that it comes from a Javanese word meaning to run, from which a river, the Sungai Melayu River, was named due to its strong current. Similar sounding variants have also appeared in accounts older than the 11th century, as toponyms for areas in Sumatra or referring to a larger region around the Strait of Malacca. The Sanskrit text Vayu Purana, thought to have been in existence since the 1st millennium CE, mentioned a land named Malayadvipa which was identified by certain scholars as the modern Malay Peninsula. Other notable accounts are by the 2nd century Ptolemy's Geographia that used the name Malayu Kulon for the west coast of Golden Chersonese, and the 7th century Yijing's account of Malayu. At some point, the Malayu kingdom took its name from the Sungai Melayu. Malayu then became associated with Srivijaya, and remained associated with various parts of Sumatra, especially Palembang, where the founder of the Malacca Sultanate is thought to have come from. It is only thought to have developed into an ethnonym as Malacca became a regional power in the 15th century. Islamization established an ethno-religious identity in Malacca, with the term Malayu beginning to appear as interchangeable with Melaccans. It may have specifically referred to local Malays speakers thought loyal to the Malaccan Sultan. The initial Portuguese use of Malayos reflected this, referring only to the ruling people of Malacca. The prominence of traders from Malacca led Malayu to be associated with Muslim traders, and from there became associated with the wider cultural and linguistic group. Malacca and later Johor claimed they were the center of Malay culture, a position supported by the British which led to the term Malay becoming more usually linked to the Malay Peninsula rather than Sumatra. Before the onset of European colonization, the Malay Peninsula was known natively as Tanah Melayu, Malayaland, under a racial classification created by a German scholar Johann Friedrich Blumenbach. The natives of maritime Southeast Asia were grouped into a single category, the Malay race. Following the expedition of French navigator Jules Dumont d'Urville to Oceania in 1826, he later proposed the terms of Malaysia, Micronesia and Melanesia to the Société de Géographie in 1831, distinguishing these Pacific cultures and island groups from the existing term Polynesia. Dumont d'Urville described Malaysia as an area commonly known as the East Indies. In 1850, the English ethnologist George Samuel Windsor Earle, writing in the Journal of the Indian Archipelago and Eastern Asia, proposed naming the islands of Southeast Asia as Malayunesia or Indonesia, favoring the former. The name Malaysia gained some use to label what is now the Malay archipelago. In modern terminology, Malay remains the name of an ethno-religious group of Austronesian people predominantly inhabiting the Malay Peninsula and portions of the adjacent islands of Southeast Asia, including the east coast of Sumatra, the coast of Borneo, and smaller islands that lie between these areas. The state that gained independence from the United Kingdom in 1957 took the name the Federation of Malaya, chosen in preference to other potential names such as Langkasuka, after the historic kingdom located at the upper section of the Malay Peninsula in the first millennium CE. The name Malaysia was adopted in 1963 when the existing states of the Federation of Malaya, plus Singapore, North Borneo and Sarawak formed a new federation. One theory posits the name was chosen so that C represented the inclusion of Singapore, North Borneo, and Sarawak to Malaya in 1963. Politicians in the Philippines contemplated renaming their state Malaysia before the modern country took the name. History - Evidence of modern human habitation in Malaysia dates back 40,000 years. In the Malay Peninsula, the first inhabitants are thought to be Negritos. Traders and settlers from India and China arrived as early as the 1st century AD, establishing trading ports and coastal towns in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Their presence resulted in strong Indian and Chinese influences on the local cultures, and the people of the Malay Peninsula adopted the religions of Hinduism and Buddhism. Sanskrit inscriptions appear as early as the 4th or 5th century. The kingdom of Langkasuka arose around the 2nd century in the northern area of the Malay Peninsula, lasting until about the 15th century. Between the 7th and 13th centuries, much of the southern Malay Peninsula was part of the maritime Srivijayan Empire. By the 13th and the 14th century, the Majapahit Empire had successfully wrested control over most of the peninsula and the Malay archipelago from Srivijaya. In the early 15th century, Parameswara, a runaway king of the former kingdom of Singapore linked to the old Srivijayan court, founded the Malacca Sultanate. The spread of Islam increased following Parameswara's conversion to that religion. Malacca was an important commercial center during this time, attracting trade from around the region. In 1511, Malacca was conquered by Portugal, after which it was taken by the Dutch in 1641. In 1786, the British Empire established a presence in Malaya. When the Sultan of Kedah leased Penang Island to the British East India Company, the British obtained the town of Singapore in 1819, and in 1824 took control of Malacca following the Anglo-Dutch Treaty. By 1826, the British directly controlled Penang, Malacca, Singapore, and the island of Labuan, which they established as the crown colony of the Straits Settlements. By the 20th century, the states of Pahang, Selangor, Perak, and Negeri Sembilan, known together as the Federated Malay States, had British residents appointed to advise the Malay rulers, to whom the rulers were bound to defer by treaty. The remaining 5 states in the peninsula, known as the Unfederated Malay States, while not directly under British rule, also accepted British advisors around the turn of the 20th century. Development on the peninsula and Borneo were generally separate until the 19th century. Under British rule, the immigration of Chinese and Indians to serve as labourers was encouraged. The area that is now Sabah came under British control as North Borneo when both the Sultan of Brunei and the Sultan of Sulu transferred their respective territorial rights of ownership between 1877 and 1878. In 1842, Sarawak was ceded by the Sultan of Brunei to James Brooke, whose successors ruled as the White Rajas over an independent kingdom until 1946, when it became a crown colony. In the Second World War, the Japanese army invaded and occupied Malaya, North Borneo, Sarawak, and Singapore for over 3 years. During this time, ethnic tensions were raised and nationalism grew. Popular support for independence increased after Malaya was reconquered by Allied forces. Post-war British plans to unite the administration of Malaya under a single crown colony called the Malayan Union met with strong opposition from the Malays, who opposed the weakening of the Malay rulers and the granting of citizenship to the ethnic Chinese. The Malayan Union, established in 1946, and consisting of all the British possessions in the Malay Peninsula with the exception of Singapore, was quickly dissolved and replaced on 1 February 1948 by the Federation of Malaya, which restored the autonomy of the rulers of the Malay states under British protection. During this time, the mostly ethnically Chinese rebels under the leadership of the Malayan Communist Party launched guerrilla operations designed to force the British out of Malaya. The Malayan Emergency, 1948 to 1960, involved a long anti-insurgency campaign by Commonwealth troops in Malaya. On the 31st of August 1957, Malaya became an independent member of the Commonwealth of Nations. After this, a plan was put in place to federate Malaya with the crown colonies of North Borneo, which joined as Sabah, Sarawak, and Singapore. The date of federation was planned to be the 31st of August 1963 so as to coincide with the anniversary of Malayan independence. However, federation was delayed until the 16th of September 1963 in order for a United Nations survey of support for federation in Sabah and Sarawak, called for by parties opposed to federation including Indonesia's Sukarno and the Sarawak United People's Party, to be completed. Federation brought heightened tensions including a conflict with Indonesia as well continuous conflicts against the communists in Borneo and the Malayan Peninsula which escalates to the Sarawak communist insurgency and Second Malayan Emergency together with several other issues such as the cross-border attacks into North Borneo by Mara pirates from the southern islands of the Philippines, Singapore being expelled from the Federation in 1965, and racial strife. This strife culminated in the 13th of May race riots in 1969. After the riots, the controversial new economic policy was launched by Prime Minister Tun Abdul Razak, trying to increase the share of the economy held by the Bumiputera. Under Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad there was a period of rapid economic growth and urbanization beginning in the 1980s. The economy shifted from being agriculturally based to one based on manufacturing and industry. Numerous mega-projects were completed, such as the Petronas Towers, the North-South Expressway, the Multimedia Super Corridor, and the new federal administrative capital of Putrajaya. However, in the late 1990s the Asian financial crisis almost caused the collapse of the currency and the stock and property markets, although they later recovered. The 1MDB scandal was a major global corruption scandal that implicated then Prime Minister Najib Razak in 2015. The scandal contributed to the first change in ruling political party since independence in the 2018 general election. In the 2020s, the country was gripped by political crisis that coincided with health and economic crises caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Government and politics. Malaysia is a federal constitutional elective monarchy, the only federal country in Southeast Asia. The system of government is closely modelled on the Westminster parliamentary system, a legacy of British rule. The head of state is the king, whose official title is the Yang Dipachanagong. The king is elected to a 5-year term by and from among the 9 hereditary rulers of the Malay states. The other 4 states, which have titular governors, do not participate in the selection. By informal agreement the position is rotated among the 9, and has been held by Abdullah of Pahang since the 31st of January 2019. The king's role has been largely ceremonial since changes to the constitution in 1994, picking ministers and members of the upper house. Legislative power is divided between federal and state legislatures. The bicameral federal parliament consists of the lower house, the House of Representatives, and the upper house, the Senate. The 222-member House of Representatives is elected for a maximum term of 5 years from single-member constituencies. All 70 senators sit for 3-year terms, 26 are elected by the 13 state assemblies, and the remaining 44 are appointed by the king upon the Prime Minister's recommendation. The parliament follows a multi-party system and the government is elected through a first-past-the-post system. Parliamentary elections are held at least once every 5 years, the most recent of which took place in May 2018. Before 2018, registered voters aged 21 and above could vote for the members of the House of Representatives and, in most of the states, for the state legislative chamber. Voting is not mandatory. In July 2019, a bill to lower the voting age to 18 years old was officially passed. Executive power is vested in the cabinet, led by the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister must be a member of the House of Representatives, who in the opinion of His Majesty the King, commands the support of a majority of members. The cabinet is chosen from members of both houses of Parliament. The Prime Minister is both the head of cabinet and the head of government. As a result of the 2018 general election, Malaysia was governed by the Pakatan Harapan political alliance. Although Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad resigned amid a political crisis in 2020, in March 2020, the Perikatan Nasional Coalition formed under Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin, before Muhyiddin lost majority support and was replaced by Deputy Prime Minister Ismail Sabri Yaakob, a veteran politician from UMNO, in August 2021. Malaysia's legal system is based on English common law. Although the judiciary is theoretically independent, its independence has been called into question and the appointment of judges lacks accountability and transparency. The highest court in the judicial system is the Federal Court, followed by the Court of Appeal and 2 high courts, one for Peninsular Malaysia and one for East Malaysia. Malaysia also has a special court to hear cases brought by or against royalty. Race is a significant force in politics. Affirmative actions such as the new economic policy and the national development policy which superseded it, were implemented to advance the standing of the Bumiputera, consisting of Malays and the indigenous tribes who are considered the original inhabitants of Malaysia, over non-Bumiputera such as Malaysian Chinese and Malaysian Indians. These policies provide preferential treatment to Bumiputera in employment, education, scholarships, business, and access to cheaper housing and assisted savings. However, it has generated greater interethnic resentment. There is ongoing debate over whether the laws and society of Malaysia should reflect Islamism or secularism. Islamic criminal laws passed by the Pan-Malaysian Islamic Party with the support of United Malays National Organisation, UMNO, state assemblymen in the State Legislative Assembly of Kelantan have been blocked by the federal government on the basis that criminal laws are the responsibility of the federal government. After the United Malays National Organisation, UMNO, lost power at the 2018 Malaysian general election, Malaysia's ranking increased by 9 places in the 2019 Democracy Index to 43rd compared to the previous year, and is classified as a flawed democracy. Malaysia's ranking in the 2020 Press Freedom Index increased by 22 places to 101st compared to the previous year, making it one of 2 countries in Southeast Asia without a difficult situation or very serious situation with regards to press freedom. However, it fell 18 places the following year due to the policies of the Perikatan Nasional government. Malaysia is marked at 48th and 62nd place according to the 2021 Corruption Perceptions Index, indicating above-average levels of corruption. Freedom House noted Malaysia as partly free in its 2018 survey. A lawsuit filed by Department of Justice, DOJ, alleged that at least $3.5 billion involving former Prime Minister Najib Razak had been stolen from Malaysia's 1MDB state-owned fund, known as the One Malaysia Development Berhad scandal. Administrative Divisions Malaysia is a federation of 13 states and 3 federal territories. These are divided between 2 regions, with 11 states and 2 federal territories on Peninsular Malaysia and the other 2 states and 1 federal territory in East Malaysia. Each state is divided into districts, which are then divided into mukim. In Sabah and Sarawak, districts are grouped into divisions. Governance of the states is divided between the federal and the state governments, with different powers reserved for each, and the federal government has direct administration of the federal territories. Each state has a unicameral state legislative assembly whose members are elected from single-member constituencies. State governments are led by chief ministers, who are state assembly members from the majority party in the assembly. In each of the states with a hereditary ruler, the chief minister is normally required to be a Malay, appointed by the ruler upon the recommendation of the prime minister, except for state elections in Sarawak. By convention, state elections are held concurrently with the federal election. Lower-level administration is carried out by local authorities, which include city councils, district councils, and municipal councils. Although autonomous statutory bodies can be created by the federal and state governments to deal with certain tasks. The federal constitution puts local authorities outside of the federal territories under the exclusive jurisdictions of the state government, although in practice the federal government has intervened in the affairs of state-local governments. There are 154 local authorities, consisting of 14 city councils, 38 municipal councils and 97 district councils. The 13 states are based on historical Malay kingdoms, and 9 of the 11 peninsular states, known as the Malay states, retain their royal families. The king is elected by and from the 9 rulers to serve a 5-year term. This king appoints governors serving a 4-year term for the states without monarchies, after consultations with the chief minister of that state. Each state has its own written constitution. Sabah and Sarawak have considerably more autonomy than the other states, most notably having separate immigration policies and controls, and a unique residency status. Federal intervention in state affairs, lack of development, and disputes over oil royalties have occasionally led to statements about secession from leaders in several states such as Penang, Johor, Kelantan, Sabah, and Sarawak, although these have not been followed up and no serious independence movements exist. States. A list of 13 states and each state capital, in brackets. Federal Territories 1. Federal Territory of Kuala Lumpur 2. Federal Territory of Labuan 3. Federal Territory of Putrajaya. Foreign Relations and Military A founding member of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, the country participates in many international organizations such as the United Nations, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, the Developing 8 Countries, and the Non-Aligned Movement, NAM. It has chaired ASEAN, the OIC, and the NAM in the past. A former British colony, it is also a member of the Commonwealth of Nations. Kuala Lumpur was the site of the first East Asia Summit in 2005. Malaysia's foreign policy is officially based on the principle of neutrality and maintaining peaceful relations with all countries, regardless of their political system. The government attaches a high priority to the security and stability of Southeast Asia, and seeks to further develop relations with other countries in the region. Historically, the government has tried to portray Malaysia as a progressive Islamic nation while strengthening relations with other Islamic states. A strong tenet of Malaysia's policy is national sovereignty and the right of a country to control its domestic affairs. Malaysia signed the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, The Spratly Islands are disputed by many states in the area, and a large portion of the South China Sea is claimed by China. Unlike its neighbors of Vietnam and the Philippines, Malaysia historically avoided conflicts with China. However, after the encroachment of Chinese ships in Malaysian territorial waters, Malaysia has become active in condemning China. Brunei and Malaysia in 2009 announced an end to claims of each other's land, and committed to resolve issues related to their maritime borders. The Philippines has a dormant claim to the eastern part of Sabah. Singapore's land reclamation has caused tensions, and minor maritime and land border disputes exist with Indonesia. The Malaysian Armed Forces have three branches: the Royal Malaysian Navy, the Malaysian Army, and the Royal Malaysian Air Force. There is no conscription, and the required age for voluntary military service is 18. The military uses 1.5% of the country's GDP, and employs 1.23% of Malaysia's manpower. Malaysian peacekeeping forces have contributed to many UN peacekeeping missions, such as in Congo, Iran, Iraq, Namibia, Cambodia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Somalia, Kosovo, East Timor, and Lebanon. The Five Power Defense Arrangements is a regional security initiative which has been in place for almost 40 years. It involves joint military exercises held among Malaysia, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. Joint exercises and war games have also been held with Brunei, China, India, Indonesia, Japan, and the United States. Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam have agreed to host joint security force exercises to secure their maritime border and tackle issues such as illegal immigration, piracy, and smuggling. Previously there were fears that extremist militants' activities in the Muslim areas of the southern Philippines and southern Thailand would spill over into Malaysia. Because of this, Malaysia began to increase its border security. Human rights. Homosexuality is illegal in Malaysia, and the authorities has imposed punishments such as caning and imprisonment. Human trafficking and sex trafficking in Malaysia are significant problems. There has also been cases of vigilante executions and beatings against LGBT individuals in Malaysia. The illegality of homosexuality in Malaysia has also been the forefront of Anwar Ibrahim's sodomy trials, which Anwar has responded to it being politically motivated. A response supported by the United Nations, UN, Working Group on Arbitrary Detention along with Amnesty International and the Human Rights Watch. The death penalty is in use for serious crimes such as murder, terrorism, drug trafficking, and kidnapping. But in June 2022, Malaysian Law Minister Wan Junaidi pledged to abolish the capital punishment and replace it with other punishments at the discretion of the court. Geography. Malaysia is the 66th largest country by total land area, with a land area of 329,613 square kilometers, 127,264 square miles. It has land borders with Thailand in West Malaysia, and Indonesia and Brunei in East Malaysia. It is linked to Singapore by a narrow causeway and a bridge. The country also has maritime boundaries with Vietnam and the Philippines. The land borders are defined in large part by geological features such as the Perlis River, the Golok River and the Pagalayan Canal, whilst some of the maritime boundaries are the subject of ongoing contention. Brunei forms what is almost an enclave in Malaysia, with the state of Sarawak dividing it into two parts. Malaysia is the only country with territory on both the Asian mainland and the Malay archipelago. The Strait of Malacca, lying between Sumatra and Peninsular Malaysia, is one of the most important thoroughfares in global commerce, carrying 40% of the world's trade. The two parts of Malaysia, separated from each other by the South China Sea, share a largely similar landscape in that both Peninsular and East Malaysia feature coastal plains rising to hills and mountains. Peninsular Malaysia, containing 40% of Malaysia's land area, extends 740 kilometers, 460 miles, from north to south, and its maximum width is 322 kilometers, 200 miles. It is divided between its east and west coasts by the Titiwangsa Mountains, rising to a peak elevation of 2,183 meters, 7,162 feet, at Mount Korbu, part of a series of mountain ranges running down the center of the peninsula. These mountains are heavily forested, and mainly composed of granite and other igneous rocks. Much of it has been eroded, creating a karst landscape. The range is the origin of some of Peninsular Malaysia's river systems. The coastal plains surrounding the peninsula reach a maximum width of 50 kilometers, 31 miles, and the peninsula's coastline is nearly 1,931 kilometers, 1,200 miles, long, although harbors are only available. On the western side, East Malaysia, on the island of Borneo, has a coastline of 2,607 kilometers, 1,620 miles. It is divided between coastal regions, hills and valleys, and a mountainous interior. The Crocker Range extends northwards from Sarawak, dividing the state of Sabah. It is the location of the 4,095 meters, 13,435 feet, high Mount Kinabalu, the tallest mountain in Malaysia. Mount Kinabalu is located in the Kinabalu National Park, which is protected as one of the 4 UNESCO World Heritage Sites in Malaysia. The highest mountain ranges formed the border between Malaysia and Indonesia. Sarawak contains the Mulu Caves, the largest cave system in the world, in the Gunung Mulu National Park, which is also a World Heritage Site. The largest river in Malaysia is the Rajang. Around these two halves of Malaysia are numerous islands, the largest of which is Bangi. The local climate is equatorial and characterized by the annual southwest, April to October, and northeast, October to February, monsoons. The temperature is moderated by the presence of the surrounding oceans. Humidity is usually high, and the average annual rainfall is 250 centimeters, 98 in. The climates of the peninsula and the east differ, as the climate on the peninsula is directly affected by wind from the mainland, as opposed to the more maritime weather of the east. Local climates can be divided into 3 regions: highland, lowland, and coastal. Climate change is likely to affect sea levels and rainfall, increasing flood risks and leading to droughts. Biodiversity and conservation. Malaysia signed the Rio Convention on Biological Diversity on the 12th of June 1993, and became a party to the convention on the 24th of June 1994. It has subsequently produced a National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, which was received by the convention on the 16th of April 1998. The country is megadiverse with a high number of species and high levels of endemism. It is estimated to contain 20% of the world's animal species. High levels of endemism are found on the diverse forests of Borneo's mountains, as species are isolated from each other by lowland forest. There are about 210 mammal species in the country. Over 620 species of birds have been recorded in Peninsular Malaysia, with many endemic to the mountains there. A high number of endemic bird species are also found in Malaysian Borneo. 250 reptile species have been recorded in the country, with about 150 species of snakes and 80 species of lizards. There are about 150 species of frogs, and thousands of insect species. The exclusive economic zone of Malaysia is 334,671 square kilometers, 129,217 square miles, and 1.5 times larger than its land area. It is mainly in the South China Sea. Some of its waters are in the Coral Triangle, a biodiversity hotspot. The waters around Sepadan Island are the most biodiverse in the world. Bordering East Malaysia, the Sulu Sea is a biodiversity hotspot, with around 600 coral species and 1,200 fish species. The unique biodiversity of Malaysian caves always attracts lovers of ecotourism from all over the world. Nearly 4,000 species of fungi, including lichen-forming species, have been recorded from Malaysia. Of the 2 fungal groups with the largest number of species in Malaysia, The Escarmacotu and their asexual states have been surveyed in some habitats, decaying wood, marine and freshwater ecosystems, as parasites of some plants, and as agents of biodegradation, but have not been or have been only poorly surveyed in other habitats, as endobionts, in soils, on dung, as human and animal pathogens. The Basidium macotu are only partly surveyed. Fungi, and mushrooms and toadstools have been studied, but Malaysian rust and smut fungi remain very poorly known. Without doubt, many more fungal species in Malaysia have not yet been recorded, and it is likely that many of those, when found, will be new to science. About 2/3 of Malaysia was covered in forest as of 2007, with some forests believed to be 130 million years old. The forests are dominated by Dipterocarps. Lowland forest covers areas below 760 meters, 2,490 feet, and formerly East Malaysia was covered in such rainforest, which is supported by its hot wet climate. There are around 14,500 species of flowering plants and trees. Besides rainforests, there are over 1,425 square kilometers, 550 square miles, of mangroves in Malaysia, and a large amount of peat forest. At higher altitudes, oaks, chestnuts, and rhododendrons replace Dipterocarps. There are an estimated 8,500 species of vascular plants in peninsular Malaysia, with another 15,000 in the east. The forests of East Malaysia are estimated to be the habitat of around 2,000 tree species, and are one of the most biodiverse areas in the world, with 240 different species of trees every hectare. These forests host many members of the Rafflesia genus, the largest flowers in the world, with a maximum diameter of 1 m, 3 feet 3 in. Logging, along with cultivation practices, has devastated tree cover, causing severe environmental degradation in the country. Over 80% of Sarawak's rainforest has been logged. Floods in East Malaysia have been worsened by the loss of trees, and over 60% of the peninsula's forest have been cleared. With current rates of deforestation, mainly for the palm oil industry, the forests are predicted to be extinct by 2020. Deforestation is a major problem for animals, fungi and plants, having caused species such as Begonia romisca to go extinct. Most remaining forest is found inside reserves and national parks. Habitat destruction has proved a threat for marine life. Illegal fishing is another major threat, with fishing methods such as dynamite fishing and poisoning depleting marine ecosystems. Leatherback turtle numbers have dropped 98% since the 1950s. Hunting has also been an issue for some animals, with overconsumption and the use of animal parts for profit endangering many animals, from marine life to tigers. Marine life is also detrimentally affected by uncontrolled tourism. The Malaysian government aims to balance economic growth with environmental protection, but has been accused of favoring big business over the environment. Some state governments are now trying to counter the environmental impact and pollution created by deforestation, and the federal government is trying to cut logging by 10% each year. A total of 28 national parks have been established, 23 in East Malaysia and 5 in the peninsula. Tourism has been limited in biodiverse areas such as Sepadan Island. Wildlife trafficking is a large issue, and the Malaysian government has held talks with the governments of Brunei and Indonesia to standardize anti-trafficking laws. Economy - Malaysia is a relatively open state-oriented and newly industrialized market economy. It has the world's 34th largest economy by nominal GDP and the 31st largest by PPP. In 2017, the large service sector contributed to 53.6% of total GDP, the industrial sector 37.6%, and the small agricultural sector roughly 8.8%. Malaysia has a low official unemployment rate of 3.9%. Its foreign exchange reserves are the world's 24th largest. It has a labor force of about 15 million, which is the world's 34th largest. Malaysia's large automotive industry ranks as the world's 22nd largest by production. Malaysia is the world's 23rd largest exporter and 25th largest importer. However, economic inequalities exist between different ethnic groups. The Chinese make up about 1/4 of the population, but accounts for 70% of the country's market capitalization. Chinese businesses in Malaysia are part of the larger Bamboo Network, a network of overseas Chinese businesses in the Southeast Asian market sharing common family and cultural ties. International trade, facilitated by the shipping route in adjacent Strait of Malacca, and manufacturing are the key sectors. Malaysia is an exporter of natural and agricultural resources, and petroleum is a major export. Malaysia has once been the largest producer of tin, rubber and palm oil in the world. Manufacturing has a large influence in the country's economy. Although Malaysia's economic structure has been moving away from it, Malaysia remains one of the world's largest producers of palm oil. Tourism is the third largest contributor to Malaysia's GDP, after the manufacturing and commodities sectors. In 2019, the sector contributed about 15.9% to the total GDP. According to the World Tourism Organization, Malaysia was the 14th most visited country in the world, and the 4th most visited country in Asia in 2019, with over 26.1 million visits. Malaysia was ranked 38th in the Travel and Tourism Competitiveness Report 2019. Its international tourism receipts in 2019 amounted to $19.8 billion. The country has developed into a center of Islamic banking, and has the highest numbers of female workers in that industry. Knowledge-based services are also expanding. In 2020, Malaysian exported high-tech products worth $92.1 billion, the second highest in the ASEAN, after Singapore. Malaysia was ranked 36th in the Global Innovation Index in 2021, and 32nd in the Global Competitiveness Report in 2022. Infrastructure-railway transport in Malaysia is state-run, and spans some 2,783 kilometers, 1,729 miles. As of 2016, Malaysia has the world's 26th largest road network, with some 238,823 kilometers, 148,398 miles, of roads. Malaysia's inland waterways are the world's 22nd longest, and total 7,200 kilometers, 4,474 miles. Among Malaysia's 114 airports, among which the busiest is Kuala Lumpur International Airport in Kuala Lumpur, which is also the 12th busiest airport in Asia. Among the 7 federal ports, the major one is Port Klang, which is the 13th busiest container port. Malaysia's flag carrier is Malaysia Airlines, providing international and domestic air services. Malaysia's telecommunications network is second only to Singapore's in Southeast Asia, with 4.7 million fixed-line subscribers and more than 30 million cellular subscribers. There are 200 industrial parks along with specialized parks such as Technology Park Malaysia and Kulim High Tech Park. Fresh water is available to over 95% of the population, with groundwater accounting for 90% of the freshwater resources. Although rural areas have been the focus of great development, they still lag behind areas such as the west coast of Peninsular Malaysia. The telecommunication network, although strong in urban areas, is less available to the rural population. Malaysia's energy infrastructure sector is largely dominated by Tenaga Nasional, the largest electric utility company in Southeast Asia. Customers are connected to electricity through the national grid. The other 2 electric utility companies in the country are Sarawak Energy and Cebu Electricity. In 2013, Malaysia's total power generation capacity was over 29,728 megawatts. Total electricity generation was 140,985.01 gigawatt hours and total electricity consumption was 116,087.51 gigawatt hours. Energy production in Malaysia is largely based on oil and natural gas, owing to Malaysia's oil reserves and natural gas reserves, which is the fourth largest in Asia-Pacific region. Demographics dash. According to the Malaysian Department of Statistics, the country's population was 32,447,385 in 2020, making it the 42nd most populated country. According to a 2012 estimate, the population is increasing by 1.54% per year. Malaysia has an average population density of 96 people per square kilometre, ranking it 116th in the world for population density. People within the 15 to 64 age group constitute 69.5% of the total population, the 0 to 14 age group corresponds to 24.5%, while senior citizens aged 65 years or older make up 6.0%. In 1960, when the first official census was recorded in Malaysia, the population was 8.11 million. 91.8% of the population are Malaysian citizens. Malaysian citizens are divided along local ethnic lines, with 69.7% considered Bumiputera. The largest group of Bumiputera are Malays, who are defined in the constitution as Muslims who practice Malay customs and culture. They play a dominant role politically. Bumiputera status is also accorded to the non-Malay indigenous groups of Sabah and Sarawak, which includes Dayaks, Iban, Baidayu, Orang-Ulu, Kadazandusan, Melanau, Bajau and others. Non-Malay Bumiputeras make up more than half of Sarawak's population and over two-thirds of Sabah's population. There are also indigenous or aboriginal groups in much smaller numbers on the peninsula, where they are collectively known as the Orang Asli. Laws over who gets Bumiputera status vary between states. There are also two other non-Bumiputera local ethnic groups. 22.5% of the population are Malaysian Chinese, while 6.8% are Malaysian Indian. The local Chinese have historically been more dominant in the business community. Local Indian are majority of Tamil descent. Malaysian citizenship is not automatically granted to those born in Malaysia, but is granted to a child born of two Malaysian parents outside Malaysia. Dual citizenship is not permitted. Citizenship in the states of Sabah and Sarawak in Malaysian Borneo are distinct from citizenship in Peninsular Malaysia for immigration purposes. Every citizen is issued a biometric smart chip identity card known as MyCard at the age of 12, and must carry the card at all times. The population is concentrated on Peninsular Malaysia, where 20 million out of approximately 28 million Malaysians live. 70% of the population is urban. Due to the rise in labor-intensive industries, the country is estimated to have over 3 million migrant workers, about 10% of the population. Sabah-based NGOs estimate that out of the 3 million that make up the population of Sabah, 2 million are illegal immigrants. Malaysia hosts a population of refugees and asylum seekers numbering approximately 171,500. Of this population, approximately 79,000 are from Burma, 72,400 from the Philippines, and 17,700 from Indonesia. Malaysian officials are reported to have turned deportees directly over to human smugglers in 2007, and Malaysia employs RILA, a volunteer militia with a history of controversies, to enforce its immigration law. Religion dash. The constitution grants freedom of religion and makes Malaysia an officially secular state, while establishing Islam as the religion of the Federation. According to the Population and Housing Census 2020 figures, ethnicity and religious beliefs correlate highly. Approximately 63.5% of the population practice Islam, 18.7% practice Buddhism, 9.1% Christianity, 6.1% Hinduism and 1.3% practice Confucianism. Taoism and other traditional Chinese religions. 2.7% declared no religion or practiced other religions or did not provide any information. The states of Sarawak, Penang and the Federal Territory of Kuala Lumpur have non-Muslim majorities. Sunni Islam of Shafi'i school of jurisprudence is the dominant branch of Islam in Malaysia, while 18% are non-denominational Muslims. The Malaysian constitution strictly defines what makes a Malay, considering Malays those who are Muslim, speak Malay regularly, practice Malay customs, and lived in or have ancestors from Brunei, Malaysia, and Singapore. Statistics from the 2010 census indicate that 83.6% of the Chinese population identify as Buddhist, with significant numbers of adherents following Taoism, 3.4%, and Christianity, 11.1%, along with small Muslim populations in areas like Penang. The majority of the Indian population follow Hinduism, 86.2%, with a significant minority identifying as Christians, 6.0%, or Muslims, 4.1%. Christianity is the predominant religion of the non-Malay Bumiputera community, 46.5%, with an additional 40.4% identifying as Muslims. Muslims are obliged to follow the decisions of Sharia courts, i.e. Sharia courts, in matters concerning their religion. The Islamic judges are expected to follow the Shafi'i legal school of Islam, which is the main madhab of Malaysia. The jurisdiction of Sharia courts is limited to Muslims in matters such as marriage, inheritance, divorce, apostasy, religious conversion, and custody among others. No other criminal or civil offences are under the jurisdiction of the Sharia courts, which have a similar hierarchy to the civil courts. Despite being the supreme courts of the land, the civil courts do not hear matters related to Islamic practices. Languages The official and national language of Malaysia is Malaysian Malay, a standardized form of the Malay language. The terminology as per government policy is Bahasa Malaysia, Malaysian language, but legislation continues to refer to the official language as Bahasa Melayu, lit. Malay language, and both terms remain in use. The National Language Act 1967 specifies the Latin, Rumi, script as the official script of the national language, but does not prohibit the use of the traditional Jawi script. English remains an active second language, with its use allowed for some official purposes under the National Language Act of 1967. In Sarawak, English is an official state language alongside Malaysian. Historically, English was the de facto administrative language. Malay became predominant after the 1969 race riots, the 13th of May incident. Malaysian English, also known as Malaysian Standard English, is a form of English derived from British English. Malaysian English is widely used in business, along with Manglish, which is a colloquial form of English with heavy Malay, Chinese, and Tamil influences. The government discourages the use of non-standard Malay but has no power to issue compounds or fines to those who use what is perceived as improper Malay on their advertisements. Many other languages are used in Malaysia, which contains speakers of 137 living languages. Peninsular Malaysia contains speakers of 41 of these languages. The native tribes of East Malaysia have their own languages which are related to, but easily distinguishable from, Malay. Iban is the main tribal language in Sarawak, while Yuzunik and Kadazan languages are spoken by the natives in Sabah. Chinese Malaysians predominantly speak Chinese dialects from the southern part of China. The more common Chinese varieties in the country are Mandarin, Cantonese, Hokkien, and so on. The Tamil language is used predominantly by the majority of Malaysian Indians. A small number of Malaysians have European ancestry and speak Creole languages, such as the Portuguese-based Malaccan Creoles, and the Spanish-based Chavacano language. Health Malaysia operates an efficient and widespread two-tier healthcare system, consisting of a universal healthcare system and a coexisting private healthcare system, provided by highly subsidized healthcare through its extensive network of public hospitals and clinics. The Ministry of Health, MOH, is the main provider of healthcare services to the country's population. Malaysia's healthcare system is considered to be among the most developed in Asia, which contributes to its thriving medical tourism industry. Malaysia spent 3.83% of its GDP on healthcare in 2019. In 2020, the overall life expectancy in Malaysia at birth was 76 years, 74 years for males and 78 years for females, and it had an infant mortality rate of 7 deaths per 1,000 births. Malaysia had a total fertility rate of 2.0 in 2020, which is just below the replacement level of 2.1. In 2020, the country's crude birth rate was 16 per 1,000 people, and the crude death rate was 5 per 1,000 people. In 2021, the principal cause of death among Malaysian adults was coronary artery disease, representing 17% of the medically certified deaths in 2020, being followed by pneumonia, which accounted for 11% of the deaths. Transport accidents are considered a major health hazard, as Malaysia, relative to its population, has one of the highest traffic fatality rates in the world. Smoking is also considered a major health issue across the country. Education. The education system of Malaysia features a non-compulsory kindergarten education followed by 6 years of compulsory primary education, and 5 years of optional secondary education. Schools in the primary education system are divided into 2 categories: national primary schools, which teach in Malay, and vernacular schools, which teach in Chinese or Tamil. Secondary education is conducted for 5 years. In the final year of secondary education, students sit for the Malaysian Certificate of Education examination. Since the introduction of the matriculation program in 1999, students who completed the 12-month program in matriculation colleges can enroll in local universities. However, in the matriculation system, only 10% of places are open to non-Bumiputera students. Culture. Malaysia has a multi-ethnic, multicultural, and multilingual society. The original culture of the area stemmed from indigenous tribes that inhabited it, along with the Malays who later moved there. Substantial influence exists from Chinese and Indian culture, dating back to when foreign trade began. Other cultural influences include the Persian, Arabic, and British cultures. Due to the structure of the government, coupled with the social contract theory, there has been minimal cultural assimilation of ethnic minorities. Some cultural disputes exist between Malaysia and neighboring countries, notably Indonesia. In 1971, the government created a national cultural policy, defining Malaysian culture. It stated that Malaysian culture must be based on the culture of the indigenous peoples of Malaysia, that it may incorporate suitable elements from other cultures, and that Islam must play a part in it. It also promoted the Malay language above others. This government intervention into culture has caused resentment among non-Malays who feel their cultural freedom was lessened. Both Chinese and Indian associations have submitted memorandums to the government, accusing it of formulating an undemocratic culture policy. Fine arts. Traditional Malaysian art was mainly centered on the areas of carving, weaving, and silversmithing. Traditional art ranges from hand-woven baskets from rural areas to the silverwork of the Malay courts. Common artworks included ornamental crease, betel nut sets, and woven batik and songket fabrics. Indigenous East Malaysians are known for their wooden masks. Each ethnic group have distinct performing arts, with little overlap between them. However, Malay art does show some North Indian influence due to the historical influence of India. Traditional Malay music and performing arts appear to have originated in the Kelantan Patani region with influences from India, China, Thailand, and Indonesia. The music is based around percussion instruments, the most important of which is the gendang, drum. There are at least 14 types of traditional drums. Drums and other traditional percussion instruments and are often made from natural materials. Music is traditionally used for storytelling, celebrating life cycle events, and occasions such as a harvest. It was once used as a form of long-distance communication. In East Malaysia, gong-based musical ensembles such as Agang and Kulintang are commonly used in ceremonies such as funerals and weddings. These ensembles are also common in neighboring regions such as in Mindanao in the Philippines, Kalimantan in Indonesia, and Brunei. Malaysia has a strong oral tradition that has existed since before the arrival of writing, and continues today. Each of the Malay sultanates created their own literary tradition, influenced by pre-existing oral stories and by the stories that came with Islam. The first Malay literature was in the Arabic script. The earliest known Malay writing is on the Terengganu stone, made in 1303. Chinese and Indian literature became common as the numbers of speakers increased in Malaysia, and locally produced works based in languages from those areas began to be produced in the 19th century. English has also become a common literary language. In 1971, the government took the step of defining the literature of different languages. Literature written in Malay was called the national literature of Malaysia. Literature in other Bumiputera languages was called regional literature, while literature in other languages was called sectional literature. Malay poetry is highly developed, and uses many forms. The hikayat form is popular, and the pantun has spread from Malay to other languages. Cuisine Malaysia's cuisine reflects the multi-ethnic makeup of its population. Many cultures from within the country and from surrounding regions have greatly influenced the cuisine. Much of the influence comes from the Malay, Chinese, Indian, Thai, Javanese, and Sumatran cultures, largely due to the country being part of the ancient spice route. The cuisine is very similar to that of Singapore and Brunei, and also bears resemblance to Filipino cuisine. The different states have varied dishes, and often the food in Malaysia is different from the original dishes. Sometimes food not found in its original culture is assimilated into another. For example, Chinese restaurants in Malaysia often serve Malay dishes. Food from one culture is sometimes also cooked using styles taken from another culture. For example, sambal belacan, shrimp paste, are commonly used as ingredients by Chinese restaurants to create the stir-fried water spinach, kung belacan. This means that although much of Malaysian food can be traced back to a certain culture, they have their own identity. Rice is a staple food, and an important constituent of the country's culture. Chili is commonly found in local cuisine, although this does not necessarily make them spicy. Media Malaysia's main newspapers are owned by the government and political parties in the ruling coalition, although some major opposition parties also have their own, which are openly sold alongside regular newspapers. A divide exists between the media in the two halves of the country. Peninsula-based media gives low priority to news from the east, and often treats the eastern states as colonies of the peninsula. As a result of this, East Malaysia region of Sarawak launched TV Sarawak as internet streaming beginning in 2014, and as TV station on the 10th of October 2020 to overcome the low priority and coverage of peninsula-based media and to solidify the representation of East Malaysia. The media have been blamed for increasing tension between Indonesia and Malaysia, and giving Malaysians a bad image of Indonesians. The country has Malay, English, Chinese, and Tamil dailies. Kadazandasan and Bajau News only available via TV broadcast Biritu RTM. Written Kadazan News was once included in publications such as the Borneo Post, the Borneo Mail, the Daily Express, and the New Sabre Times. But publication has ceased with the newspaper or as a section. Freedom of the press is limited, with numerous restrictions on publishing rights and information dissemination. The government has previously tried to crack down on opposition papers before elections. In 2007, a government agency issued a directive to all private television and radio stations to refrain from broadcasting speeches made by opposition leaders, a move condemned by politicians from the opposition Democratic Action Party. Sabre, where all tabloids but one are independent of government control, has the freest press in Malaysia. Laws such as the Printing Presses and Publications Act have also been cited as curtailing freedom of expression. Holidays and festivals. Malaysians observe a number of holidays and festivities throughout the year. Some are federally gazetted public holidays and some are observed by individual states. Other festivals are observed by particular ethnic or religion groups, and the main holiday of each major group has been declared a public holiday. The most observed national holiday is Hari Merdeka, Independence Day, on the 31st of August, commemorating the independence of the Federation of Malaya in 1957. Malaysia Day on the 16th of September commemorates Federation in 1963. Other notable national holidays are Labor Day, the 1st of May, and the King's Birthday, first week of June. Muslim holidays are prominent as Islam is the state religion. Hari Raya Puasa, also called Hari Raya Idul Fitri, Malay for Eid al-Fitr. Hari Raya Haji, also called Hari Raya Idul Adha, Malay for Eid al-Adha, Maulid Rasul, birthday of the Prophet, and others being observed. Malaysian Chinese celebrate festivals such as Chinese New Year and others relating to traditional Chinese beliefs. Wesak Day is observed and celebrated by Buddhists. Hindus in Malaysia celebrate Deepavali, the festival of lights, while Taipasam is a religious rite which sees pilgrims from all over the country converge at the Batu Caves. Malaysia's Christian community celebrates most of the holidays observed by Christians elsewhere, most notably Christmas and Easter. In addition to this, the Dayak community in Sarawak celebrate a harvest festival known as Gawai, and the Kadazandasan community celebrate Kamatan. Despite most festivals being identified with a particular ethnic or religious group, celebrations are universal. In a custom known as open house, Malaysians participate in the celebrations of others, often visiting the houses of those who identify with the festival. Sports. Popular sports in Malaysia include association football, badminton, field hockey, bowls, tennis, squash, martial arts, horse riding, sailing, and skateboarding. Football is the most popular sport in Malaysia. Badminton matches also attract thousands of spectators, and since 1948 Malaysia has been one of 4 countries to hold the Thomas Cup, the World Team Championship trophy of men's badminton. The Malaysian Lawn Bowls Federation was registered in 1997. Squash was brought to the country by members of the British Army, with the first competition being held in 1939. The Squash Rackets Association of Malaysia was created on the 25th of June 1972. The men's national field hockey team ranked 10th in the world as of June 2022. The 3rd Hockey World Cup was hosted at Merdeka Stadium in Kuala Lumpur, as well as the 10th Cup. The country also has its own Formula One track, the Sepang International Circuit, with the first Malaysian Grand Prix held in 1999. Traditional sports include Silat Melayu, the most common style of martial arts practiced by ethnic Malays. The Federation of Malaya Olympic Council was formed in 1953, and received recognition by the IOC in 1954. It first participated in the 1956 Melbourne Olympic Games. The council was renamed the Olympic Council of Malaysia in 1964, and has participated in all but 1 Olympic Games since its inception. The largest number of athletes ever sent to the Olympics was 57 to the 1972 Munich Olympic Games. Besides the Olympic Games, Malaysia also participates in the Paralympic Games. Malaysia has competed at the Commonwealth Games since 1950 as Malaya, and 1966 as Malaysia, and the Games were hosted in Kuala Lumpur in 1998.